Hey everyone, I'm Joe. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the month of September 2019. September was a much better month than the previous 2 months. I read 15 books in total, comprising 11 authors and 2 genres. And as far as the quality goes, that was also really good. There were only a few books that were relatively mediocre. Most of them I really enjoyed and I thought were really well written, and frankly I was really impressed by overall. Anyway, without further delay, I'll get started talking about the books. Oh, and a few of these books I've already done separate reviews of over the last few weeks, and several more I will be reviewing over the upcoming month as well. So hopefully this video will be a little bit shorter than it might otherwise be. Anyway, the first 2 books I read were Friendly Fire and War Criminals, both by Gavin Smith. These are books 2 and 3 in the Bastard Legion series. I read book 1, or reread book 1 to be precise, last month, and I have really enjoyed what I thought to be a trilogy at first, and indeed I read these 2 books because I thought, this is books 2 and 3 in the trilogy, I will read them and I will do a separate review of the trilogy as a whole. But that's not actually the case, because book 3 ends on an obvious note where there must be a book 4. The overall plotline of the series has not been resolved either. There must be one more book, possibly 2 to be honest, considering the direction and the speed that the overall plot is going, which is fine by me because I've been really enjoying these books. These are military science fiction where the main character is a former ex-soldier, a woman called Mckillip. She manages to hijack a prison transport spaceship, and she fits explosive colours on all of the inmates' necks and uses them as her own convict army. And essentially she becomes the sort of leader of a mercenary army, of course, because they have to obey her, because otherwise the head gets blown off, which is generally messy and unfortunate if you enjoy having your head attached. And this is a series that is fast paced, fun. Yes, it has its moments of violence, obviously, because you are dealing with a spaceship with multiple thousands of convicted killers and horrible people on it. The main character, Mckillip, she even says herself that she's not entirely, sort of normal, I suppose you could say. She's pretty messed up because of her background. Her father, who was also ex-military, was murdered only 6 months before the first book starts, and that is the overarching plotline, because she knows one of the people that killed her father is on this transport ship. So eventually, the idea is, and obviously what will happen, is she'll figure out who killed her father. And overall, this is a really enjoyable series, which I really liked, and I thought was well paced and fun overall. The next 2 things that I read was Something Coming Through and Into Everywhere, both by Paul McAuley. These are books 1 and 2 in the Jackaroo universe. The Jackaroo are a benevolent and peaceful alien race that reveals itself to humanity and starts giving humanity access to technology and ideas that is way ahead of our current time and our current ability to produce ourselves. And various characters, however, get very suspicious of this because, true altruism, especially on this scale, this is a racial altruism where they're just giving us stuff for no apparent reason, just because they feel like it, they're nice. Seems very strange, and certain characters wonder why they're doing it and what are they getting out of it, because this really is the biggest scale going, and this leads into some weird and wonderful places. It does take a while to get going, especially the first book. Frankly, it takes about half of the book before I was like, oh, okay, that's why this is happening, that's why that is also happening. And I'll actually enjoy myself at the midway point. Until then I was a bit like, have I made a mistake reading this? Frankly, but it does click, at least for me it did, and things work quite well, and the second book was better again, because by then you're like, oh, these things happen. Although the second book does have a bit of variation, and it does go in a slightly different way again, because this is not first book and direct sequel as such. There's an interaction of characters and ideas between the books, but they're not directly tied, which is an interesting idea and one that I enjoyed, because it goes in a different way. It creates a little bit more of a suspense and a bit more of an unknown feeling, which the first book managed as well, and the second book definitely continues. So if this sounds like something you might enjoy, I would recommend them overall. The next thing that I read was The Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I've done a separate review of this, which I will link in the description box below, of course. But suffice to say, this is a classic science fiction book. This is Arthur C. Clarke's first ever published full-length novel, and it's one that I really enjoyed. This is very simply a case of write what you know, because in it, the main character is a science fiction author. He goes on a trip to Mars, encounters the people living on Mars and their daily way of life, and he comes up with certain revelations about himself and the way he thinks about the world, both worlds, Earth and indeed Mars. And it's a nice book because the characters are non-violent to be on the whole, and it's just about exploration and about human curiosity and about humans trying to be more than we are now, which I like, and Clarke does this rather well, and I would recommend this overall. The next book is Downward to the Earth by Robert Silverberg. This is the first ever book I have read by Robert Silverberg, and it will not be the last, because I actually really enjoyed this overall. Now, the synopsis of this is quite simply, one man goes back to a planet that he used to essentially work on years ago. This planet is one that humans essentially started to sort of colonise partially, and then we realise there is a sentient alien species on it, which is kind of like a elephant essentially. So when we found out there is a sentient race on it, we stopped trying to colonise and essentially abuse the planet, which, you know, humanity has an unfortunate habit of doing to other countries, for instance. And now this one character, the main character, wants to go back and try to make amends for certain things that both he did, and almost make amends for the way humanity has treated this planet and its inhabitants, because we haven't been very nice, unsurprisingly. You know, sort of like a colonialist sort of history with the planet, and it has some interesting ideas. It delves into some topics that are quite dark, but he delves into them really well, however. And overall, I was quite impressed by this. You know, he writes in a very logical manner. The characters are more in depth than I expected, to be honest. To start with, the characters are only lightly touched on in some ways, and I thought they were going to be more on the world building, and actually that's not entirely the case in an interesting way. So overall, I did enjoy this, and I would recommend it. The next book that I read was The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia A. Mckillip. Now, this is a fantasy novel. The synopsis of it is a woman called Sybil, who is a distant ancestor of this super powerful, essentially magician and magic user in this world. She's living relatively quietly on a mountain called Eld Mountain, and she is able to communicate and essentially control these creatures, the Forgotten Beasts of the title. And the plot comes into play, and the beasts do, when she starts interacting with a neighbouring king of some distance away, and things start spiralling outwards in a direction that she's not used to, because she's been living really isolated on this mountainside. Other characters come into play, one character in particular, and it goes in ways that I wasn't quite expecting. It's a interesting fantasy book which has some quite interesting twists and turns, as you might expect. It's relatively short, but it actually manages to feel much longer and much more in depth than its sheer page count would allow you to think. I really enjoyed this and I was really impressed because, frankly, if nothing more, the page count, I thought it was going to be lighter and somehow less important than it was, I suppose you would say. But actually, everything that she tried to say in it was really quite significant and felt detailed and in depth, and the world building was fantastic, the character building was great. I really enjoyed this book overall. I thought it was really well written and frankly an amazing book, and I definitely want to read more by Mckillip, whom I'm very much starting to think is going to be one of my favourite fantasy authors ever at this point. The next book that I read was the Medusa Chronicles, written by Stephen Baxter and Alastair Reynolds. Now, I have done a separate review of this a few weeks ago, which I will link in the description box below again. But suffice to say, the synopsis of this is one man who is got a reputation for being the first man to go into the atmosphere of Jupiter and explore it. He had a horrible accident. He became almost a cyborg, essentially, you know, because there wasn't much left of him after his really horrific accident. He then gets an extended lifespan because he's primarily a machine, and this lends to some interesting situations because he encounters the rise of a artificial intelligence civilization in another part of our galaxy, and various other things he sees happen because, you know, he has this extended and slightly strange viewpoint because he obviously was human and he still is human, at least in spirit, but he's artificial almost entirely. So it's a strange viewpoint and one that they use for very effective means, and overall I really did enjoy this book. The next book that I read was The Wandering Earth by Cixin. Now I'm going to be doing a separate review on this book, so I'm not going to say too much now. Suffice to say, this is a science fiction short story collection. It contains 11 short stories, I believe, one of them being the title story, The Wandering Earth, which I watched the Chinese made movie based on 2 months ago, which I really enjoyed. The book, or the story of The Wandering Earth itself, actually was my least favourite of this collection, in fact, but overall I loved this short story collection. All the short stories were really dark and quite grim in places, and yet somehow I just really enjoyed them. Normally really dark, grim stuff doesn't always work out for me well. This did, because just his writing style and the way he creates the characters and fits them into these massive plot lines with ideas in these weird and wonderful ways just works. And I really enjoyed this book immensely, I really did. It was well written, got ideas, and overall I was just really impressed by this, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I read was Eon by Greg Bear, and yes, this is another one of the Yellow Spine Masterworks. This is the first book and one of the only 2 books of this month that I thought was fairly mediocre, to be honest. The plot of this is this large artifact called the Stone enters our solar system. It becomes quite close to Earth in distance, and humanity starts to interact with it. We go over to it, we enter this artifact, and there are 7 chambers in this artifact, this giant structure. 6 of them are obviously alien, but at least fairly normal, relatively speaking. One of them, however, seems to be infinite in length. You go inside and you keep going and going and going, and there seems to be an end to this strange chamber. And this has politics in it as well, because there are Russian astronauts as well as European and American astronauts trying to get on board this artifact. People are working against each other as well as with each other, so it creates a lot of tension and intrigue. The 7th chamber, this infinite room, it also comes into play in a really strange and weird way. It takes a while to start to understand the plot, and overall I still don't love the book, however, because the writing was perfectly solid, but I thought it meandered and went in a slightly weird way than I was expecting, and it doesn't get to the point very easily, I thought. He could have made this tighter and more controlled to the writing, and he doesn't. And yeah, some people love this book, like I think it's a classic science fiction book. I mean, it is in the Masterworks after all, but for me it was okay, but nothing special. But you know, it's still readable, just not my favourite. The next book that I read was The World Jones Made by Philip K. Dick. The synopsis of this is that there is a man who can see into the future, and to be precise, he can see only up to a year into the future. Now, when certain people realise this, he becomes a really sought after figure, because of course some people want to use this ability for their own ends. He realises what he has to offer and gain by using his power. So this creates an interesting situation where he starts getting into over time a more and more powerful position where he can control people in government and politics. Other people are trying to stop him, other people are trying to make him even more so, and he starts to change the way the world works, because when you can see into the future, and he starts to predict some rather strange and slightly worrying things, other people get worried and concerned. So it's a book that has some really interesting ideas. I wasn't mad on it, however, because Philip K. Dick has, and indeed he does it in this book, a habit of kind of wandering off towards the end of books in a way that leaves you a bit wondering, well, you know, did he just mean to end it that way, or should he have actually written a more solid ending? He does this often. This is a good example of it, sadly, but I still liked it overall. It just has that issue with that Philip K. Dick always has, where he just wanders off, which is unfortunate. The penultimate thing that I read in September was Hexarchate Stories by Yoon Lee. This is a science fiction short stories collection. As you might have guessed from the title, all of these short stories are set in the Hexarchate universe, which is based entirely upon the events and created from the Machineries of Empire trilogy, which starts with Nine Fox Gambit. That is a trilogy that won various awards. I think it is an extremely good trilogy as well. I did a separate review of one of the books. I can't even remember which book I've reviewed now, but I will link that in the description box below once I can find it. This is a brilliant accompanying book to that trilogy. It has quite a lot of short stories in it, about what, 20 or so? I should have actually double checked it. Some of them are very short, some of them are much longer, and they basically add little bits of extra content and little bits of detail onto the Machineries of Empire universe from before the events of the trilogy, during and afterwards. And I just really enjoyed these because they were just, some of them were really interesting, some of them were quite dark, some of them were light-hearted. It was just a really nice mixture and a brilliant addition to the universe. And I think a kind of a nice send-off to the trilogy as well. You know, the trilogy has ended now. This just ends it by adding a few little extra details, which makes it, you know, sort of more fun, and it makes it nice to think back on that trilogy, which I will have to reread at some point, probably next year now. But this is a great accompanying. So if you like the Machineries of Empire trilogy, yeah, you'll be reading this. And finally, the last thing that I read was a trilogy, and that is the Rift War Trilogy by Raymond E. Feist. This comprises Magician, otherwise known in many countries as two books. In fact, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. In the UK, it is combined into one larger book. Silverthorn and A Darkness at Sethanon. Now, this trilogy is the first in the Rift War Cycle universe, which has 30 books within it. My plan is to every single month I am planning to read the next set of books. It is comprised of different duologies, trilogies, 4 sets and a set of 5. So each month I'll read a new set. I'm going to be reviewing every single set of books within this universe, starting with this, so I'm not going to say too much now because there will be a review in the next month of this trilogy. Suffice to say, this is a fantasy trilogy. This is a reread for me, although the only books in this world that I've read so far, so all the others will be brand new to me. that I love. Now, I read this trilogy quite close to when I first read Robin Hobb and the Feist trilogy many years ago. As you may know, if you've watched my other videos at various times, that trilogy and Robin Hobb doesn't work for me overall. I find that trilogy and her writing to be very dark and depressing and frankly pessimistic. These books are more light-hearted. They are optimistic in nature. Yes, dark and nasty events do happen in the books, but there's still a sense of optimism in the book and that things will get better, which I like greatly. And frankly, I realise that is my kind of fantasy. Now, I don't like super dark fantasy. I like fantasy where there's optimism and things will get better. You know, humanity and humans will try to ultimately help each other and help themselves to not have a horrible life, which worked out for me on a very important personal level. Anyway, and I'll talk about the plot line and stuff in a separate review, because the plot line is like 3 books, trilogy, it's very complex, and it's about 2 worlds having met for the first time. One of them is very warlike, the other are some big long war, complex plot, many characters, there's magic, there's different races, all sorts of things go on, and they're fantastic overall. Anyway, with that said, that is it for all of the books that I've read in September. If you've read any of these books, then please feel free to leave a comment and we can discuss them. If you've got any suggestions on books you think I might be interested in reading based on these, because I'm always interested and open to new authors and new books, then please as well leave a comment, because I'll be very interested to hear suggestions. All the links that I mentioned to the views and things will be in the description box below, as well as all my social media. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.